Okay. If you've been to these conferences for any length of time, you realize that what we try and do here in the adult class every morning is to try and do a series of studies that in some manner or form complements what the main theme of the conference is. And of course the main theme of the conference this year has to do with the blessedness of our blessed hope. And Pastor Russ is primarily going through various aspects of blessedness to the rapture. And last night, of course, dealing primarily with just setting the stage for an appreciation for the fact, of course, that the rapture is part of the revelation of the mystery for and about this dispensation of grace in which we live. But in these morning sessions, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about Israel's blessed hope. I had to turn to a passage here, Zechariah chapter 14, to start us off on that. Now, you're not going to find the expression blessed hope used in God's program with Israel. But you understand and appreciate that when the Lord Jesus Christ returns to this earth at the end of his day of wrath out here, at the end of the tribulation period and everything, that's going to be a blessed event for the nation Israel, the remnant in particular. So it's not inappropriate to utilize the term blessed hope in connection with the Lord's return to Israel, but understand and appreciate that technically that term applies to us in this dispensation of grace. You find it over there, of course, in Titus chapter 2. But as I said, I want to kind of complement and also in a sense contrast the doctrine of the rapture, the Lord's return for us at the end of this dispensation of grace, by having us look at some things that pertain to Israel's expectation of the Lord's returning to them at the end of the tribulation period there. And, oops, carpet tripping. Also, the kind of things that we're going to look at are, I guess you might say, they're not the normal things that people would think about when it comes to the Lord's return at the end of the tribulation period. Now, let me just preface what we're going to do here and give you a little bit of scope of understanding with respect to what I hope to accomplish over the next 3 mornings. Like I said, I want to look at some things that are not typical when it comes to the Lord's return. And primarily I want to look at things that are going to be going on just prior to and at the time the Lord himself returns at the end of his day of wrath there. And there are some absolutely phenomenal things going to be taking place at that time. Some things that are terrifying in one sense, and just downright exciting and almost downright fun to study out and learn about. And those are the kind of things that I want us to look at. Now, I want to get underway here by having, like I said, turn to Zechariah chapter 14. Let's just read the first 5 verses here of Zechariah 14 and get an appreciation for the fact that when the remnant of Israel that's gone through the tribulation period there and are seeing the signs taking place at that time and are following the signs and going through the book of the Revelation like a daily newspaper and seeing events take place and know that their redemption draweth nigh and know that the time, that even though they don't know the exact day and the hour, they know the proximity of when the Lord is returning. As that event comes closer and closer, there's going to be a blessedness, so to speak, in their mentality as they anxiously look forward to that event. And you get a sense of that here in Zechariah chapter 14 when you realize something's going to be going on, especially within the land of Israel itself and within Jerusalem itself during those last 3.5 years of the Lord's day of wrath there. Zechariah chapter 14 verse 1, it says, "Behold, the day of the Lord cometh, and thy spoil shall be divided in the midst of thee." Talking about the day of the Lord coming. It's an entire period of time there. Daniel's 70th week, as it says here on the chart. The day of the Lord cometh. And then he says, "And thy spoil shall be divided in the midst of thee." And he's talking not only about the nation of Israel as a whole, but especially the city of Jerusalem. It's going to come under siege. It's going to come under attack. And it's going to be spoiled. And it's going to be divided in the midst of them, as it says. And in verse 2 he says, "For I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle. And the city shall be taken, and the houses rifled, and the women ravished, and half of the city shall go forth into captivity, and the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city." There's an event that takes place in the midpoint of Daniel's 70th week here, when the man of sin sets up the abomination of desolation there, and then puts an extermination policy into effect against the nation Israel, and particularly against the remnant of Israel. And what's being spoken about there, especially in verse 2, has to do with that particular event. And then verse 3 says, "Then shall the Lord go forth and fight against those nations as when he fought in the day of battle. And his feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives shall cleave in the midst thereof toward the east and toward the west, and there shall be a very great valley. And half of the mountain shall remove toward the north, and half of it toward the south, and ye shall flee. Note the ye there. Cast your eyes once again back up to verse 2 there. And notice he says, half of the city of Jerusalem shall go forth into captivity, and the residue of the people shall not be cut off. And half of them go forth to captivity, half of them are still there. And when he comes back, there's members of the remnant of Israel that are there in Jerusalem at that time when he comes back. And he says, you're going to flee, he says in verse 5, to the valley of the mountain that he creates when his feet stand, it says there, on the Mount of Olives. For the valley of the mountain shall reach unto Azal. Yea, said ye shall flee like ye fled from before the earthquake in the days of Uzziah king of Judah. And the Lord my God shall come, and all the saints with thee. That's his holy angels once again coming, and he gathers all nations against Jerusalem to battle, and he comes to whop them all. He comes to vanquish all Israel's enemies. Now, just for a moment, think of yourself as a member of the remnant of Israel who's in that situation there. Would that be a blessed hope to you? Sure, that would be a blessed hope when the Lord returns and does that. Now, that's what we're going to be talking about. And I'm particularly after, like I said, some not commonly understood and appreciated, and sometimes some almost abnormal type things that the Lord is going to do when he comes back as described here. In fact, you just saw one in verse 4 that's kind of unique if you really think about it. It says, his feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives shall cleave in the midst thereof. That doesn't happen every day. Mountains, we have mountains all around here, and you don't see mountains just split on a daily occurrence. This is a rather strange and unique and special phenomenon that's going to take place when the Lord returns at the end of his program with Israel out there. And we're going to look about that one a little later on. But there's a whole bunch of these type things that I want you to have some appreciation for. And as I said, these kind of things are just fun. I get excited when I study these kind of things, and I just have a lot of fun studying these type matters. So I want you to have some fun. Not that Russ isn't going to let you have some fun also, but I want you to have some fun in these particular studies, going through these type matters and learning some of these special, unique things that are part of Israel's blessed hope. You know, look at the passage once again here back in verse 3. It says, then the Lord shall go forth and fight against those nations as when he fought in the day of battle. When that event takes place, when the Lord returns at the end of the tribulation period there for Israel and fights as described there in Zechariah chapter 14, do you know that that battle has already been rehearsed in Israel's program? It says he's going to fight as when he fought in the day of battle. As when he fought. That's past tense. He has already taken his nation through a rehearsal for when he comes back. He's already given them a foretaste of the day of battle he's talking about here. In fact, we're going to look at a passage, not today, probably on our last session on Sunday morning there, in which the Lord has already given his nation Israel a map in which the details of the route that he takes when he comes back is specified for them, and they know the very places he is going to stop, they know the very places he is going to fight battles, and they know the exact way in which he's going to enter the land. The whole thing's been mapped out for them in advance. In fact, back in Numbers, we'll look at it on Sunday morning, Moses talks about the fact that God has already written a book. It's called the Book of the Wars of the Lord. He's already written it. The book's already written. He's taken excerpts of that book and placed it in the Bible. That book is with him in the third heaven. When he comes back, he has that book with him. And he goes to the places that are written down in that book. And he fights battles on the very places that are written down in that book. And when he brought Israel out of the land of Egypt, you go back and you study that in Exodus there and Numbers. If you go through and really pay attention to what's going on there, something should strike your curiosity. The Lord does not take a direct route into the land. You ever notice that? Israel does not make a beeline from Egypt into the land. In fact, there was a highway going right out of Egypt, right up to the coast of the Philistines. That would have brought them right into the land of Canaan. I-90. Right in there. No red lights, no nothing. They could have been there within days. He didn't do that. He took them on, if you map the thing out, he took them on a zigzag course. There's a reason why he did all that. There's places that he's going to fight battles when he comes back. And he brought the nation Israel to every battle site. Like I've written down a book. That's a phenomenal thing. Well, look at that. I'm just giving you a scope of an idea of the type of things we're going to talk about here. But we're not going to start with that. We're going to finish up with that issue. We're going to start with something else. Come with me, if you would, to Luke chapter 21. Luke chapter 21. By the way, I'm just mentioning to you the fact that the Lord has already mapped out and written down for Israel the very route that he's going to take when he returns at the end. That you realize there's a route that you and I are going to take into the third heaven when the rapture takes place? You realize you just can't, when you're caught up, you just can't go any old way to the third heaven? You realize that the heavenly places, there's places you just can't go through? There's a path and a route you take. If you can't sleep tonight, spend some time thinking about that one. Anyway, if we get the opportunity on Sunday when we deal with the Lord's route when he returns at the end, maybe we'll have a chance to talk a little bit about that. But anyway, Luke chapter 21 here. Look with me if you would. Let's see. Beginning in verse 20. The Lord's talking here to the apostles, to the members of the remnant of Israel, about what's going to be going on out here during the Lord's day of wrath. Let's put it this way here. Get rid of the dispensation of grace and just pretend it isn't even going to take place because we're dealing with Israel's program here. All right, he's talking to them back at this time here. The extension of mercy and forbearance he's going to give to his nation here is going to take place as the opening chapter of the book of Acts describe. And then when Stephen saw him standing at the right hand of the Father, if he didn't interrupt the program by bringing in the dispensation of grace, the next thing that would have taken place, according to Psalm 2, is he would begin to speak unto his people in his wrath and then have his day of wrath. That's what the prophetic program called for. And the Lord's preparing the members of the remnant here for that very event once the extension of mercy and forbearance is over. And he's going to describe for them that 7-year period of time there and everything, give them a basic outline like he does in Matthew 24, and describe the issue of his return at the end there. Pick it up if you would, Luke chapter 21 at verse 20. It says, when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies. Does that just remind you of where we were back there in Zechariah chapter 4? He brings all nations against Jerusalem to battle and everything. Okay. When you shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto. For these be the days of vengeance, that all things that are written may be fulfilled. He's talking about that time once again here. The day of the Lord's wrath, the days of his vengeance, as he avenges his cause with Israel against Satan and the nations of his confederacy in particular, that he's put together in connection with his extermination policy against the nation of Israel. Once again, verse 23. But woe unto them that are with child, and them that give suck in those days. For there shall be great distress in the land, and wrath, once again, wrath upon this people. And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations, just like we saw back there in Zechariah 14. Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles, till the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. And then he says, and there shall be signs in the sun, and the moon, and the stars, and upon the earth the stress of nations, with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear, and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken. And then shall they see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. And when these things begin to come to pass, then look up, and lift up your heads, for your redemption draweth nigh. There's that blessed hope concept once again for them. When they see those signs that indicate once again the progression of events here during that final aspect of the day of the Lord, as they see those things take place, they know that His coming is nigh, their redemption is nigh once again, and that's their blessed hope concept. Now, what I'm after here especially, that we're going to focus upon first when it comes to these interesting and phenomenal events that will be taking place in connection with the Lord's return to Israel, look once again at verse 25. He says, there shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations. He says, with perplexity. Then he says, the sea and the waves roaring. Now, I think when you read that through, you get a good grasp in your understanding when he talks about the signs in the sun, the moon, the stars, and everything. Why are the sea and the waves going to be roaring? What is it that's making that happen, and what's the significance in that? Look at the next verse. He says, men's hearts failing them for... Ever have your heart failure? I don't mean have heart failure in the sense of and you keel over. But you ever have your heart failure for fear? You just lose your resolve. You just lose your guts. Sometimes you do what's spoken about back there in Job chapter 40, and Job chapter 41, where you purge yourself by reasons of breaking forth. You know what that means? Okay. Heart fails you because of fear and everything. But notice he says that men's hearts will be failing for fear and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. And the things that are coming on the earth and the things that are taking place with the earth, with the sea and the waves roaring. Then he gives the reason why it's all taking place. He says, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken. I want you to spend some time with me going over those physical phenomenons that God describes going to be taking place when the powers of heaven are shaken, that cause the earth to go through the turmoil that's described there, especially with the sea and the waves roaring. I used to live outside Boston, Massachusetts, so we go to the Atlantic Ocean quite often and everything. And the New England coast is a very rocky coast. And you can stand there on the coast, like the coast of Maine and everything like that, and you can have the waves coming in, you can hear the roar and all that. And at times, you can't talk to the person next to you because of the noise. You've been to the Pacific and the Oregon coast, undoubtedly you've heard the very same type thing. But my heart never failed me for fear when I saw that taking place or heard those things going on. In fact, I stood back and this is neat. You want to have a tape recorder and record that. It just sounded, in fact, they do that. You can go to a music store and buy a CD and has the sound of the waves coming in and the tranquility and the serenity. That's supposed to be tranquil and serene right now. They don't sell those tapes and those CDs so your hearts can fail you for fear. But when this goes on here, men's hearts are going to be failing them for fear. And what produces the sea and the waves roaring is because the powers of heaven are being shaken. Start to look at this. Some phenomenal things in connection with this. Come back with me now, if you would, to the 18th Psalm. We're going to run a few verses here. And I mean quickly so. I want you to run some verses with me with respect to the day of the Lord out here, in which the emphasis is placed upon the issue of God shaking the earth. Let's start in Psalm 18. Psalm 18. The 18th Psalm is a marvelous psalm when it comes to the issue of the Lord's return to Israel at the end of the tribulation period. I mentioned the issue of the route the Lord takes. David maps out the basic route the Lord takes when he returns in the 18th Psalm. Pick it up in verse 1. I will love thee, O Lord, my strength. The Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer, my God, my strength, in whom I will trust, my buckler and the horn of my salvation and my high tower. I will call upon the Lord, who is worthy to be praised. So shall I be saved from mine enemies. The sorrows of death compassed me, and the floods of ungodly men made me afraid. The sorrows of hell compassed me about. The snares of death prevented me. In my distress I called upon the Lord and cried unto my God. He heard my voice out of his temple, and my cry came before him even into his ears. Verse 7. Then the earth shook and trembled. The foundations also of the hills moved and were shaken, because he was wroth. Now, let's stop there for a second. We'll spend some, when we deal with the route the Lord takes when he returns and everything, come back here to Psalm 18. We'll talk about it in more detail. But as the superscription of this psalm indicates, and as the doctrine with respect to what God did with David is explained in 2 Samuel and other places, David served as a type of a tribulation saint here in this psalm. And he writes a psalm with respect to a situation that a great number of the members of the remnant of Israel are going to be in out here when they're persecuted like he was. And when their only hope is going to be for deliverance is going to be when the Lord himself returns. And David here is describing that very issue. And he describes here how that in his distress, verse 6, he called upon the Lord, cried unto his God. He said, he heard my voice out of his temple. You know, the temple in Jerusalem hadn't been built yet when David was writing. The temple he's talking about is the one up there in the third heaven. You can go to the book of the Revelation and find out when that event takes place, when the members of the remnant of Israel cry out, and the Lord hears them out of his temple, and then he takes a particular course of action, preparatory to his own physical return at the end there. David says, verse 7, he says, then the earth shook and trembled. Notice he doesn't say, then the land shook. He's not talking about some local event. And we talk about earthquakes. And when you listen to a seismologist talk about it, maybe talks about the magnitude of the thing on the Richter scale and everything. And quite often, if they give a detailed account of the thing, they'll talk about the extent to which the tremors went, how far out they went from the epicenter. You know, a lot of them go a long way, but they don't go right around the globe. They don't have the whole earth shaking. Really, it's a portion of the land shaking, or a portion of the earth that shakes. This thing is the whole earth shaking. We just saw over there a few minutes ago in Zechariah chapter 14, when the Lord puts his feet on the Mount of Olives there and causes the mountain to split. He said that'll be like what happened in the days of Uzziah when you fled from the earthquake then. That was a localized type of. This is the whole earth shaking. And trembled, it shook and trembled. The foundations of also of the hills moved and were shaken because he was wroth. This thing is produced because of the Lord's wrath. This thing is not produced simply because of some magna building up in the pressure, that type of thing, a tectonic plate moving. This thing takes place because the Lord is wroth. It says, there went up a smoke out of his nostrils, and fire out of his mouth devoured. Coals were kindled by it. It says he bowed the heavens also and came down, and darkness was under his feet. He rode upon a cherub and did fly, and so forth there. David's describing that event right out there. But when the Lord returns, the earth's going to shake. The whole earth is going to tremble. And the foundations of the hills are going to be moved. You go to the book of the Revelation, and it even talks about the fact that all the mountains and the islands were moved out of their places. Look, run a few more verses with me here, and you begin to see why the sea and the waves are roaring. Come with me, if you would, very quickly over to Isaiah chapter 2. Isaiah chapter 2. Isaiah chapter 2. Get down to verse 10 here. Isaiah 2 verse 10. Enter into the rock and hide thee in the dust for fear of the Lord and for the glory of his majesty. The lofty looks of man shall be humbled, and the haughtiness of men shall be bowed down. The Lord alone shall be exalted in that day. What day? Verse 12. For the day of the Lord of hosts shall be upon every one that is proud and lofty, and every one that is lifted up, and he shall be brought low. And upon all the cedars of Lebanon that are high and lifted up, upon all the oaks of Bashan, and upon all the high mountains, and upon all the hills that are lifted up, upon every high tower, and upon every fenced wall, upon all the ships of Tarshish, and upon all the pleasant pictures. And the loftiness of man shall be bowed down, and the haughtiness of men shall be made low, and the Lord alone shall be exalted in that day. And the idols he shall utterly abolish, and they shall go into the holes of the rocks, into the caves of the earth, for fear of the Lord, and for the glory of his majesty, when he ariseth to shake terribly the earth. And look at it again down there in verse 21. To go into the clefts of the rocks and into the tops of the ragged rocks for fear of the Lord, for the glory of his majesty, when he arises to shake terribly the earth. Notice he's not just going to shake it, he's going to shake it terribly. When you do something terribly, what does that strike in the hearts of people who are experiencing it? Terror. The word terribly comes from the same root word, terror. Something that's done terribly instills terror. Men's hearts failing them for fear of the things they see going on. He's going to shake terribly. Now let's find out how terribly he shakes it. Come over, if you would, to chapter 13. As you go through Isaiah cycles, by the way. I don't know if you ever noticed that. When you're studying Isaiah Isaiah cycles. He takes you through the scope of, well, from the time he's writing, the entire scope of that fifth course of punishment in God's program with Israel, of which the Lord's Day of Wrath is the fifth and final installment. He takes you through it at least 7 times in the book of Isaiah. And every time he goes through it and then cycles back, he adds more details, like layering information and doctrine on it. Well, when you're in chapter 2, you learn about the fact he's going to shake terribly the earth. Next time you're confronted with that issue in chapter 13, you begin to get a little more of a better picture as to how terrible it's going to be when it's shaken. Isaiah chapter 13, look with me if you would at verse 13. Therefore I will shake the heavens, and the earth shall remove out of her place in the wrath of the Lord of hosts, in the day of his fierce anger. Oh. Okay, we got the earth shaking. We got the earth trembling. We got it being shaken terribly. And we saw originally back in Luke chapter 21 that the thing that's producing all this, the sea and the waves roar, is the powers of heaven are shaken. Now he's telling you here, he's shaking the heavens. And when the heavens get shaken, what happens to the earth? It's removed out of her place. Well, let's find out how bad the removing is. Come over to chapter 24. Let's let Isaiah cycle us through one more time. Find out how bad the removing is. Isaiah 24, verse 17. And there's more that Isaiah says about how bad the removing is here in the 24th chapter than we're going to look at. I'm going to have you start in verse 17. Fear and the pit and the snare are upon thee, O inhabitant of the earth. Talking about what's going to happen out there. Verse 18, and it shall come to pass that he who fleeth from the noise of the fear shall fall into the pit, and he that cometh up out of the midst of the pit shall be taken in the snare. For the windows from on high are open, and the foundations of the earth do shake. The earth is utterly broken down. The earth is clean dissolved. The earth is moved exceedingly. The earth shall reel to and fro like a drunkard, and shall be removed like a cottage, and the transgression thereof shall be heavy upon it, shall fall and not rise again. I don't try and spend too much time with drunkards, but I do see them occasionally, and you can't watch television without seeing them all the time. So I know what happens when a drunkard reels to and fro. I'm not going to try and give you a demonstration right now because I probably get tangled up in the holes in this carpet and do myself serious bodily harm. But you know what happened. That type of thing. The earth removed out of her place, and the earth is, the physical globe is reeling to and fro like a drunkard. What happens to the oceans when that takes place? You think the sea and the waves might be doing a little bit of roaring when that event's taking place? Think men's hearts might be failing them for fear when that's going on? Now let's look at a passage in which God even explains how it is He does it. We know from Luke chapter 21, He says, "For the powers of heaven shall be shaken." Come with me, if you would, to Job chapter 38. Job chapter 38. By the way, the more you consider these things, aren't you glad you're delivered from the wrath to come? These things are fun to examine and everything and to appreciate them from Israel's perspective, but thank the Lord for the rapture of the church that's taken us out of here before this stuff starts taking place. Job chapter 38. Now, before we start looking here in Job, stick your finger in Job 38. They come very quickly, if you would, over to James chapter 5. The other end of the spectrum, so to speak. James chapter 5. James 5. I just want to take a moment or two, if that's possible for me to do. Take a moment to just talk to you a little bit about the book of Job, so you have an appreciation of what's going on in the book of Job. And you'll get an appreciation for it here in James chapter 5. James, you understand and appreciate. James, of course, is an apostle of the circumcision, writing to the members of the remnant of Israel, preparing those members of the remnant for the Lord's day of wrath out here. Even though the program was interrupted by the dispensation of grace, when the program is resumed, the members of the remnant of Israel are going to utilize the book of James. They're going to utilize Hebrews through the Revelation in particular, but they're going to utilize the book of James. James taught the members of the remnant of Israel he was writing to, he taught them the book of Job. And the reason why is because the book of Job has an awful lot to say and explain about the Lord's day of wrath out there. Look at it here, James chapter 5. Pick it up in verse 8. James says to the members of the remnant, "Be ye also patient, establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord draweth nigh. Grudge not one against another, brethren, lest ye be condemned. Behold, the judge standeth before the door. Take, my brethren, the prophets who have spoken in the name of the Lord for an example of suffering, affliction, and of patience. Behold, we count them happy which endure. Ye have heard of the patience of Job, and have seen the end of the Lord, that the Lord is very pitiful and of tender mercy." Job is like a type of a tribulation saint out there, just as David was, in a great number of situations David was put in, and a number of things he went through. In fact, when you go through the book of Job there and everything, and you see how the Lord deals with Job, especially at the end, in the 42nd chapter there, the Lord deals with Job in the exact same manner he spells out in Isaiah. He will deal with the members of the remnant who make it through that time. Job gets a double blessing. They're going to get a double blessing. They get a name change. They're going to get a name change. All this kind of stuff takes place. But Job, like I said, is a type of a member of a tribulation saint out there. And the things, for example, that Job goes through with his three supposed friends and all their verbal persecution that they direct at Job, the same three categories of line of attack that those men take with Job are the exact same three lines of attack apostate Israel is going to take with the remnant out there in that day. You're going to hear the exact same kind of things. And the exact same counsel, fundamental counsel that Job needed to be able to understand and appreciate why he was going through the things that he was going through and so forth, the exact same fundamental counsel the members of the remnant need out there. And when you go through Job chapter 38 through chapter 41, and you look at the counsel that God gives to Job, the entire body of that counsel has to do with the issue of God repossessing the earth, which is the issue in God's program with Israel, and which is what Israel is all about. the mechanical means by which he repossesses the earth and takes it back from the usurper. And that's why the whole thing starts off with Job, with Satan and God. Well, you have a basic understanding and appreciation for that. You understand why the Lord does the things with Job that he does in chapter 38. Get back to Job 38 now. When it says that at the beginning of Job 38, then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up now thy loins like a man, for I will demand of thee, and answer thou me. Job has not gotten the counsel that he needs from his three friends, nor from Elihu there. He hasn't got the counsel's been darkened, but Job needed counsel. That's what he needed. God's going to give him the counsel that he needs. And God asked Job a series of questions here. And the questions, the answers to the questions and everything, and the issues involved in the questions have to do with the counsel that Job needs. And the questions that God asked Job go right back to the beginning of why the earth was created in the first place, what God's plan and purpose of the earth is all about, and how it is God is going to deal with the guy who usurped the dominion of the earth, Satan himself, the high arm. And Job needs to understand you're involved in this issue, Job. You're strategically involved in my plan for the repossession of the earth. And you're going through some things in connection with that. Now, in just giving that little bit of background information, come on down here in Job 38, if you would, and pick it up in verse 12. Job 38 and verse 12. God's going to ask Job here something about his ability to do something with the sun. He's going to come along and say, Job, can you do this with the sun? The answer, of course, is no. Job can't. But if Job was going to do what the Lord said later on, save himself from the usurper, he'd have to be able to do this. Job 38, verse 12. Hast thou commanded the morning since thy days, and caused the day spring to know his place, that it, the day spring, might take hold of the ends of the earth, that the wicked might be shaken out of it. It is turned, he says, as clay to the seal, and they stand as a garment. And from the wicked their light is withholden, and the high arm shall be broken. The high arm is Satan's arm. And God is telling Job here what it is that he is going to do when he has his day and deals with Leviathan. He's going to do something that's going to result in his high arm being broken. It's going to be the last issue when it comes to destroying and demolishing the adversary's implementation of his plan of evil on this earth. And the fascinating thing is, there's a physical phenomenon that needs to be produced in order to achieve it. And it's produced by a power of heaven that does something to the earth. Look at it once again. Hast thou, verse 12, commanded the morning since thy days, and caused the dayspring to know his place, that it might take hold of the ends of the earth, that the wicked might be shaken out of it. The sun is one of those powers of heaven. Or, as he's going to talk about later on, one of the ordinances of heaven that has an influence on the earth. He says it's going to take hold of the ends of the earth and shake the wicked out of it. Now, we've always seen the issue. The earth's going to reel to and fro like a drunkard. The earth's going to shake. The earth's going to tremble. God's going to utilize the sun to do that very thing. And he's been commanding it since he created it for that very purpose. Now, if you don't know why he chose to do the sun for that, go back to Genesis chapter 1 and go through the days of creation. He didn't create the sun on the first day, did he? He didn't create the sun on the second day either, did he? He didn't create the sun on the third day either, did he? He created the sun later on to replace something that had already been a light bearer. The very first day he said, "Let there be light." And the light was given to someone to hold and to bear it. And then that individual lost that right. And God created the sun to rule the day and a lesser light to rule the night. And the day when he breaks the arm, the high arm of that creature who became Leviathan, he utilizes the very sun to shake the earth and shake the wicked out of it and break his high arm. That's why in Luke 21, with the sea and the waves roaring, the earth shaking everything, it's because the powers of heaven are shaken. Now it says powers, plural, not just one. There's more influence than just the sun on the earth. Look later on down in Job 38. We got about 2 minutes left. Look later on down here in Job 38, verse 31. Job 38 and verse 31. The Lord asked Job, "Canst thou bind the sweet influences of Pleiades, or loose the bands of Orion? Canst thou bring forth Mazzaroth in his season, or canst thou guide Actarus with his sons? Knowest thou the ordinances of heaven? Canst thou set the dominion thereof in the earth?" Now, there's more there than we got time to go over in a minute and a half here. But think very carefully of how he describes those constellations. Notice he talks about the sweet influences of Pleiades. Right now, Pleiades has some sweet influences as an ordinance of heaven upon the earth. What if something is done to that so those influences are no longer sweet? Think it might have an adverse effect upon the earth? Yeah. He says there, "Canst thou bind them?" When the sweet influences of Pleiades are bound, when something's bound, it's not free to operate. When the sweet influences of Pleiades are bound, there's no more sweet influences. And then he says, "Or loose the bands of Orion." Right now the bands are there. They've been there since God created that constellation. What happens when you loose them? I don't know what happens when you lose them. But I know something's going to happen. I know when you bind sweet influences, there's no more sweet influences. I know when you loose the bands Orion, when you loose a band, you take like a barrel, you got a band around that thing, you loose the band, the thing goes boing. When you loose the bands Orion, something's going to happen. These are the ordinances of heaven. These are some of the powers of heaven. When they get shaken, it has an adverse effect upon the earth. And some absolutely phenomenal physical events are going to be occurring just prior to the Lord's return, but as Israel's blessed hope. Now, we didn't get very far here. It's 10:15, we got to stop. I want to pick up here tomorrow morning. And having seen this, have you look at a few other phenomenal things that are going to be taking place just prior to the Lord's return and at the time he returns. And all this will set the stage for the issue of his route, battles he's going to fight at that time, and the marvelous way he has already mapped that out for the remnant of Israel. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for the opportunity we've had here in this opening session to our day before us, an opportunity to examine the fantastic things you have in your program with Israel and the things the remnant has to look forward to. And as we appreciate these things, we also recognize how fantastic it is for us to be delivered from the Lord's day of wrath and not to be here when men's hearts are failing for fear for things they see going on upon the earth. But we also appreciate the fact that as you have mapped out everything so precisely and described everything so precisely with respect to Israel's deliverance, we have such precision and marvelous things also to appreciate with respect to our deliverance from the wrath to come by the Lord's coming to receive us unto himself and gather us together, the rapture of the church. We thank you once again for the time to examine these things now as we begin our day together, and we look forward to a time of edification throughout the balance of the day. Give you thanks in Christ's name. Amen.